Are U.S. allies joining President Biden in countering the Chinese Communist Party? Plus, new sanctions for Uyghur persecution. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Surfshark Alert. It helps detect if your private information has been leaked online or is part of a data breach. So, this week in China news, from the start of his presidential campaign, President Biden said he'd work with U.S. allies to counter the Chinese Communist Party. And now, for the first time, it seems like that strategy might be bearing fruit. The U.S., Canada, UK, and EU joined together to sanction China for its treatment of Uyghur Muslims. The sanctions target current and former officials, plus a paramilitary organization involved in the mass detention of Uyghurs in Xinjiang. The officials targeted will have their assets frozen and be banned from travel. This is honestly surprising, considering this is the first time Europe has used sanctions against China since the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. It's even more surprising considering the EU signed a preliminary trade deal with China at the end of December, in which human rights and U.S. concerns didn't factor in. The U.S. had led the way with sanctions on China under the Trump administration. The U.S. had also labeled the Uyghur persecution genocide. However, this coordinated sanctioning under the Biden administration is new. Is Biden making good on his promise to work with U.S. allies to counter China? Earlier this month, Biden also met with leaders of the Quad, an alliance of India, Japan, Australia, and the U.S. aimed at countering China. But if you're a U.S. ally who's wondering whether you'll have to choose between the U.S. and China, don't worry. This week, Secretary of State Antony Blinken also said the U.S. won't force allies into an us or them choice between the U.S. and China. The U.S. wants to outcompete with China, not simply seek to defeat it, Blinken said. When asked to respond to Blinken's comment, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian attempted to say something about America's decline, but instead just laughed uncontrollably for 5 minutes. And after the break, I'll tell you how China has responded to America and its allies. Welcome back. The new sanctions on Chinese officials are no laughing matter for the Communist Party. In fact, they've responded with their own sanctions on the EU. Those sanctions include blacklisting 10 European lawmakers, as well as several think tanks and academics. The EU sanctions China for crimes against humanity. China sanctions the EU for sanctioning them. Makes sense. Of course, that may mean that fancy new trade deal with Europe might be doomed. That's because several of the European lawmakers the Chinese regime sanctioned are members of the European Parliament, which has to approve the trade deal. And as a result of the sanctions, the European Parliament canceled a meeting that was supposed to discuss that deal. The US and China had also signed a trade deal in 2020, that was right before the coronavirus became a global pandemic. And this may surprise you, but China hasn't been holding up its end of the deal. So if that deal goes down the drain, boo frickin' who. And now, to punish the US, the Chinese Communist Party has been running a non-stop propaganda blitz. They're accusing the US of racism, inequality, and a poor pandemic response. You know, they say we criticize in others the things we see in ourselves. Despite the draw of the Chinese market, the rest of the world is beginning to wise up to the risk posed by the Chinese Communist Party. Take Canada, which is also part of the recent sanctions. China has kidnapped 2 Canadian citizens, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. Well, in the last week, both Michaels were secretly put on trial for spying. In both cases, the verdict hasn't been announced. But China's justice system is very efficient. Everyone put on trial is found guilty. Foreign journalists and diplomats were banned from the trials, but in a show of support, more than 24 diplomats representing several countries, including Canada and the United States, tried to gain access to the courtroom, only to be turned away by security personnel. Hey, do you think the Chinese Communist Party's hostage-taking might actually be backfiring? More on that after the break. Welcome back. There are more signs that the Chinese Communist Party's aggression is turning the world against it. NATO is now looking to build partnerships with Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand to counter China. And another U.S. admiral is warning a Chinese invasion of Taiwan is closer than most people think. Of course, he's obviously not talking about most people who watch China Uncensored. But as the Uyghur genocide continues to turn people against the Chinese Communist Party, the party is striking back. Facebook recently caught Chinese hackers creating fake profiles to attack Uyghurs abroad. The hackers would pose as activists or journalists supporting the Uyghurs. They would send targeted Uyghurs links to compromised websites. They even created fake prayer apps for Android. Meanwhile, the Chinese regime has launched a boycott of H&M for criticizing the treatment of Uyghurs. In this statement last year, H&M said, "Oh, I guess that page doesn't exist anymore." But nothing is ever really gone from the internet. Here's their original statement, which said, H&M Group is deeply concerned by reports from civil society organizations and media that include accusations of forced labor and discrimination of ethno-religious minorities in Xinjiang. They also said they'd stop buying cotton from Xinjiang, since it's made with Uyghur slave labor. Nike also released a statement on Xinjiang, saying they're committed to ethical and responsible manufacturing, and that they do not source products from Xinjiang, even though they lobbied against a Uyghur slave labor bill in Congress. And now, Nike might be next on China's boycott list. On Wednesday, Nike was at the top of Weibo's hot search list. Some users were furious that Nike had joined the boycott of cotton from the region. Never thought I'd see boycotts against companies for opposing genocide and slave labor. But that's the Chinese Communist Party for you. And this episode is sponsored by Surfshark Alert. Big data breaches happen all the time, like the 2019 Capital One breach that affected 100 million Americans, or the 2017 Equifax hack that exposed data of nearly 150 million Americans. Whether these hacks come from China or elsewhere, your private information can be exposed, like your credit card number, bank account balance, social security number, and more. If you're concerned about data breaches, identity theft, password leaks, or hackers, you should use Surfshark Alert. Surfshark Alert will notify you if your data is compromised. This way you can change your passwords, close exposed accounts, or switch to new companies. And for a limited time, you can save 75% on a 1-year Surfshark Alert plan. Plus, you'll get 3 extra months free, and you'll get a free Surfshark VPN subscription. All of this for just $3.19 per month. To get this great deal, go to surfshark.deals/uncensoredalert and use the code uncensoredalert. Take control of your online security. Monitor your credit cards. Guard your email passwords. Go to surfshark.deals/uncensoredalert to learn more. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.